welcome to teaching learning session. Today we discuss about the perception attitude of consumer behavior. What the perception, how the perception and attitude plays an important role and why it is very important for the marketers, right? How it impacts the consumer behavior, perceptions and attitude. What is perception, right? Perception is process of developing a viewpoint, right? Perception, as the name indicates, it is our viewpoint, what we think about something, about someone, about some event. That is our perception. It's our viewpoint. Perception is what? Viewpoint. How we look at something, at someone. That is perception. The study of consumer perception is important for marketers. Obviously, it is important for the marketer because it is the viewpoint of the customer. How a consumer views about what the consumer thinks about your product. That is an important role. If consumer has a positive viewpoint about your product, then it will result positively. If consumer have a negative viewpoint about your product, then definitely the consumer is not gonna to purchase your product and it will impact your business. So this perception plays an important role. It is very important for the marketer, as buying decisions are not made on the basis of the objective reality, but on the basis of perception of that reality that consumer hold in their mind. Although your product might be very good, but if the consumer's perception about your product is not good, then they are not gonna to buy that, right? So buying decision are not only made on the basis of the objective reality, but it is on the basis of the perception of that reality that consumers hold in their mind. So consumers buys the product on the basis of their perception, what they think about their product. There is a perception, there is a process of perception, right? There are certain stimuli or sensory input stimuli like your vision, right? Your touch, right? Touch, taste, audio, video, vision. That is, these all stimuli or these sensory inputs which plays an important role, right? This leads to the exposure, right? Exposure leads to the attention, and attention to the interpretation. Interpretation leads to response and the perception. So all these stimuli or the sensory inputs, like here, if you hear something, if you heard about this something, right? Or if you saw something, if you see something, right? If you have seen ad of something, or if you have seen something, if you have tried something or touched something. Here, suppose if I want to buy some clothes, and that touch effect plays an important role. So all other stimuli, it leads to exposure. These stimuli lead to exposure, and when we are exposed to something, it leads to attention. We pay attention towards that thing, right? Attention leads to interpretation. Attention, according to our attention, we interpret that object, whether that object is useful or not, whether we need that object or not, and how we felt about that object or not. Then this interpretation leads to responses. If we interpret it in a positive way, then our perception, then this response leads to the perception, that is viewpoint. We create a positive viewpoint about something. And if we interpret this something about in a negative way, then our response will be negative, and our perception, our viewpoint will be negative, right? So in first place, only a very small number of stimuli in our environment are ever noticed, and even smaller amount is attended to. The stimuli that do enter consciousness might not be processed objectively. The meaning of stimulus is interpreted by individual who is influenced by his or her unique biases, needs, and experiences. Right? All this leads to the formation of perception. That is what I explained it to you. Right? See, there are certain stimuli that stimuli or sensory input we are exposed to, it leads to our consciousness, and then it leads to our attention, and we interpret it on the basis of our experience, on basis of our knowledge, on basis of our biases, right? And this leads to the formation of perception. Now, there is a sensory system, right? Stimuli or the sensory input. Sensory stimuli or external stimuli or sensory input can be received from a number of sources, right? The inputs picked up by our five senses, right? They constitutes the raw data or sensation that generate the type of responses. Sensory that emanating from the external environment, that is hearing a song on FM radio, can generate an internal sensory experience, right? The sensory inputs evokes historic imagery in which event was actually occurred or recalled, and data that we receive from our sensory system determine how we respond to our product. Our sensory system plays an important role. We get the external stimuli or the sensory input can be received from a number of sources, right? The input picked up by our five senses, it constitutes the raw data, and the sensory data that emanating from the external environment can generate a sensory experience. What type of this sensory inputs invokes are historic images, right? And that is on the basis of this we respond to our product or we make a perception, right? Marketers rely heavily on the visual elements in the advertising, store design and packaging. There are five senses. The first is the vision. The marketer heavily rely on the vision, right? Heavily rely on the visual element in advertising. That is store design or packaging, that plays an important role. Advertising plays an important role. It plays an impact. It creates an impact on consumers' mind. That the store design plays an important role. At times when we visit a store, we feel like that yes, when I need this product, although that was never in my mind whether I need that product or not. After having a look on that product, right, because of that store design, they have displayed that product in that way that people feel like that this is the product which we need, which we always needed, and now this is available, we should buy it. The packaging plays an important role. At times we buy the product because of the packaging, right? So packaging, all this vision plays an important role. Meanings are communicated on the visual channel through a product size, styling, brightness, distinctiveness from the competitor. So apart from that design, packaging and advertising, right, that meanings are communicated on the visual channel, that how you communicate the meanings through the product size. Product size plays an important role. The styling of the product, the brightness or the colors of the product, the distinctive feature from your competitor's product, that plays an important role. And even color is one of the most important aspect of visual communications, right? Because colors are rich in symbolic value and the cultural meaning, right? So vision is one of the very important elements on which marketers rely. The second stimuli is smell. Smell plays an important role. At times when we pass by some bakery, we always feel like, yes, although I'm not hungry, right, but I feel like I should have that, right? Order can stir emotions or create calming feeling, right? They can invoke memories or relieve stresses, right? When, as I've given you the example, when at times when we pass by some bakery, right, that smell relieves our stresses, right? And we feel like that I want to have it, although I'm not hungry, although my calorie budget is, after having this, my calorie budget is going to be move. But still, smell plays an important role, and this smell tempted us at times. This smell tempted us to have the product. Sound, music and sound, they are also important to the marketers. Many aspects of sound may affect the people's feelings and behavior. Effect of the background music on the mood and the influence of speaking rate on attitude changes and message comprehensions. Sound plays an important role, right? Although smell, vision, then the sound plays an important role, right? It impacts the consumers or the people's feelings and behavior, right? That effective background, that background music even affects or influence the feelings or the behavior of consumer, right? And the influence of speaking rate on attitude change, in the speaking, that is the speaking also have influence on the attitude change and the message comprehension. The way you speak to the consumer, even that plays an important role, right? So sound plays an important role. Then the touch, senses of touch plays an important role in consumer perception, evaluation, and decision making of a product. And that sensation of that, the senses of touch plays a very important role, right? If we touch something and we feel like, yes, this is one of the quality of the product is good, we can purchase that product, right? Or and by touching the product, we can compare that product with the similar type of the product. This plays an important role in creating the perception of the consumers and the decision making about the product. Right? At times, we prefer, majority of times the Indian consumer prefers to buy a product after touching that product, or from offline, or buy the product offline rather than the online. Because of that, online they cannot feel and touch the product, and this feel and touch plays an important role, especially apparels, right? If we want to buy some clothes, then we feel like that we should want to see the quality of the cloth, that the how that the quality of the, say, quality or the color of the cloth, and that touch plays an important role. Then the taste again plays an important role, especially taste is important. Because why taste is important? That taste plays an important role, in case of foods and other items, right? So perception plays a very important role. It is very important. Why perception? Because perception plays an important role in decision making, right? Learning and memory. Learning and memory. Concept of learning. Learning refers to to a relatively permanent change in behavior that is caused by experience. See, what is perception? Perception is, what is perception? That is what you think about someone or something or some product. That is your perception. Now, learning is a permanent type of a change. It is relatively permanent change in behavior that is caused by the experience. Because of our experience, we always say na, that I have learned it from my experience that I should do this and I should not do this, right? So learning is a permanent change in the behavior, and that is caused by the experience. A more detailed definition of learning is when it is viewed as learning is a process in which behavior capabilities are changed as a result of experience, provided the change cannot be accounted for by native response tendencies, maturation, or any temporary state of organism due to fatigue, drugs, or any temporary factor. So what is learning? A permanent change in the behavior because of experience, that is learning. We consider learning when it is a permanent change, and that change cannot be accounted for or by native responses of tendencies, because of the tendencies, because of fatigue, or the temporary state of the organism or the individual due to fatigue or any other temporary factor. Means, in short, it is a permanent behavior change. If there is a permanent behavior change, then that is known as learning. Right? The keyword of definition is the process, behavioral capabilities, and enduring changes. Thus, learning is not an act. It is not the behavior, but capability to behave and permanency of change through the experience. Capabilities, it is not the behavior, how you behave, but it is capabilities to behave. That is the permanent behave, and that there is a change in the behavior because of the experiences. There are various theories of learning. We'll discuss few theories of learning. The first theory of learning is classical conditioning. So what is learning? That is the permanent behavior changes is learning. Right? The first theory of learning is classical conditioning. You might have heard about this theory, right? Classical conditioning occurs when the stimulus that elicits a response is paired with stimulus that initially does not produces a response on its own. Suppose there is a stimulus which evokes a response, and it is paired with another stimulus that initially does not able to provoke a response on its own. Right? So there is a stimulus, that evokes a response, right, is paired with another stimulus that initially does not able to elicit a response on its own. Over the time, this second stimulus causes a similar response because it is associated with the first stimulus. So there are two stimulus. The first stimulus is which evokes a response, right? Right. Second stimulus is that stimulus which is associated with the first stimulus, but when that second stimulus is alone, that does not that does not that was not able to evoke the similar type of the response, right? So the first stimulus is the stimulus which is responsible for evocation of the response, right? And the second stimulus is that stimulus that when it is in pair with or when it is in combination with the first stimulus, then only it can start, then it can evoke a response. And when that second stimulus is alone, that was not able to evoke that type of a response, right? But over a period of time, there is a change that this second stimulus causes a similar response, right? Because it is associated with the first stimulus, right? This phenomenon was first demonstrated in dogs by Evan Pavlov, a Russian psychologist doing research on digestion in animals, right? So this theory was actually given by a Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov. What was his research? Pavlov conducted a number of conditioning trials by pairing a neutral stimulus, that is a bell, with stimulus known to cause a salivation response in dogs. Right? So what he did is he conducted a number of conditioning trials. How he did it? By pairing a neutral stimulus, right? He paired a neutral stimulus. What was that neutral stimulus? That was a bell with a stimulus known to cause salivations, right? The powder, that is the second stimulus that was known to cause the salivation of the response, that is the meat powder. The meat powder was an unconditioned stimulus because it was naturally capable of causing the response, right? Unconditioned stimulus. Over the bell become a conditioned stimulus, So there were two type of stimulus, conditioned and unconditioned stimulus. The second stimulus was unconditioned stimulus because it was actually capable of causing the response, and conditioned stimulus was the bell, was the conditioned stimulus. It did not initially causes salivation because dogs learned to associate the bell with the meat powder and began to salivate at the sound of bell only. Right. See, at the beginning, when Pavlov, right, when he used to ring the bell, the dogs were not, that bell did not initially causes the salivation, right? But when that bell was associated with unconditioned stimulus, that is with the meat, right, that with the meat powder, the dog learns to associate the bell with the meat powder and begin to salivate at the sound of bell only. The thing was that what was the, how it happened, that at the beginning, the scientist tried to salivate the dogs only by using bells, but that conditioned stimulus, that is the bell, was not able to that was not, that bell was, yeah, the dogs were not, that bell was not able to do the, was not able to achieve the objective. Then he combined the another stimulus, that is the dog meat powder, with the stimulus, that is the conditioned stimulus, with the bell. Right now, after ringing the bell, he started giving that meat powder to the dogs. Right, meat powder to the dogs. That meat powder was responsible for the salivation of the dogs, right? So this, now that bell, when it is associated with meat powder, that started causing the salivation, right? But after some time, when the dog learned to associate that bell with the meat powder, only at the sound of the bell, right, they started to salivate. Even the credit card. So this is the classical conditioning. This is the classical conditioning, that is on a particular, even on presence of the unconditioned, that is conditioned stimulus, can be able to stimulate the required response, right? See, for example, if we associate it with the this theory with the marketing, then the credit card becomes the conditioned stimulus that triggers a greater spending. Especially, it is a stimulus that is present only in situation where consumer can spend money, where consumer can spend more money, right? So this could be a example, right? The following are some very important principles of classical conditioning, that of classical conditioning of great use to the marketer, that is the repetition. Conditioning effects are more likely to occur after the conditioned stimulus have been paired a number of times, right? So see, repetition, there should be repetition, that is the conditioning effects are more likely to occur after the conditioned stimuli have been paired a number of times. Repeated exposure increases the strength of stimulus response associated and prevent the decay of these association in memory. So there should be a repetition of the exposure, and this repetition of exposure can increase the strength of stimulus response, right? That is stimulus response association. This can increase the strength of stimulus response association and prevent the decay of this association in memory. Many classical advertising campaigns consist of product slogan that have been repeated so many times that are in consumers' mind. That is like 2 minutes noodle. Example is 2 minutes noodle. Whenever we think about Maggie, that comes into our mind that it is 2 minutes task, 2 minute noodle. It will need to take 2 minutes to prepare that noodles, 2 minutes noodles, right? So this is very important that there should be a conditioning, and that conditioning should be repeated, and that is important because it prevents the decay of association in memory, right? So many classical advertising campaign consist of a product slogan that have been repeated so many times that you have to repeat that stimulus many times, and that stimulus must be paired with other stimulus. Stimulus generalization. It refers to the tendency of stimulus to a CS, that is conditioned stimulus, to evoke similar conditioned response. Stimulus generalization, what is this? It refers to a tendency of a stimuli to a conditioned stimulus to evoke a similar conditioned responses, right? That is, the conditioned stimulus should evoke a similar type of a response. Pavlov noticed that in subsequent studies that his dogs would sometimes salivate even when they heard the noise that only resembled a bell. This is what the that is the tendency of that the conditioned stimuli should be able to evoke a similar type of a conditioned response, right? That is stimulus generalization. That stimulus generalization is that the CS, that is the conditioned stimuli, should be able to evoke a similar type of a conditioned response. As Pavlov noticed that his dog would be sometimes salivate even when they hear a similar type of a sound. That sound, the sound that resembles the bell. People react to other similar stimuli much in the same way they respond to the original stimulus. Marketer uses this concept to create and sell me too type of a product with similar sounding names or packaging color very close to the market leaders, right? See, because if some product is doing well, then what the marketer try to do, marketer try to create or create a concept. They try to use they try to create and sell their product, right, with similar sounding names and packaging coloring which is very close to the market leader or the product which is doing well in the market, right? This is stimulus generalization. Then next is stimulus discrimination. This stimulus discrimination occurs when a stimulus similar to CS is not followed by, that is conditioned stimulus is not followed by unconditioned stimulus, right? When this happens, reactions are weakened and will soon disappear. That is when similar to, that is the stimulus discrimination occur when a stimulus similar to conditioned stimulus, right, that is not followed by UCS, that is unconditioned stimulus. CS not followed by UCS. Part of learning process involves making a response to some stimuli but not the other stimuli, right? That is, a manufacturer of a well-established brand commonly urges consumer not to buy the cheap imitations because the results will not be what they expect, even seeking to provide cues to distinguish the original brands from the cheaper copies, right? So that is when this is not, when the conditioned stimulus is not followed by the UCS, right? That is when the manufacturer or the marketer urges the consumer not to buy a imitated products, right? And because it will not give the results what is expected, even seeking and provide to they try to distinguish the original product from the cheaper copies, right? So this was a classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is that there are two type of the stimulus, that is the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, right? Conditioned stimulus should be followed by should follow the unconditioned stimulus, then only it can provide the results, right? And because unconditioned stimulus, but after some time, initially when the conditioned stimulus follows the unconditioned stimulus, then only people get the results. But after some time, that conditioned stimulus might be able to give that the same type of results, the required results, right? This was the classical theory. Now the cognitive learning theory, right? Cognitive learning explains the learning as a result of mental process. Cognitive means anything which is related to mind. So this explains the learning as a result of mental process. In contrast to the behavior theories of learning, cognitive learning theory stresses the importance of internal mental process. This perspective views people as a problem solver who actively use the information from the world around them to master their environment. Supporter of this viewpoint also stresses the role of creativity and insight during the learning process. The cognitive theory explanations of learning are strongly based on the memory. So the next theory is the cognitive learning theory. Cognitive means anything related to mind, right? So cognitive thing is a result of a mental process, right? Right. So cognitive theory is basically it is related to the internal mental process, right? This perspective, this cognitive theory views people as a problem solver, right? Problem solver. These people actively use the information from the world around them to master their environment. If they have their problem, if they have their any problem, they try to get the information related to their problem and try to solve their problem, right? Then the supporter of this viewpoint also stresses the role of creativity and insight during the learning process, right? The cognitive theory explained the learning from a strongly based on the memory. There are two complex issues of learning, right? Although learning is what the permanent behavior changes learning, but still there are two important issues of learning. First is the issue of consciousness. Many modern theorists are beginning to regard some instances of conditioning as cognitive process, especially where expectations are formed about the linkage between the stimuli and response. Studies using masking effect, which is difficult for subjects to learn, CS and UCS association shows us substantial reductions in conditioning. So there is an issue of consciousness in learning. There is an issue of consciousness, that is where when there is a masking effect, right? Masking effect where it is difficult for subject to learn conditioning stimulus and unconditioning stimulus association, right? When it becomes difficult for subject to understand the association of CS and UCS, right? So when there is a difficulty in forming an association between the CS and UCS for the subject, it shows a substantial reduction in conditioning, right? When one can associate, when one can associate CS with UCS, the linkage, when one can link the CS and UCS, then only it can show the result, right? There could be a conditioning process when the subject is not able to learn the association between CS and UCS. Then it shows a reduction in conditioning, right? Observational learning is a process of learning by watching the behavior of others, right? First is the issues of consciousness. Then the next type of learning is the observational learning. Right? Observational learning is one of the important type of the learning. Observation learning is what? It is the process of learning by watching the behavior of others. When we watch others, there are four processes of observation learning. That is attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. Right? So there are four processes of observation learning: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation, and all this plays an important role in consumer behavior. Attention is the observer must pay attention to something in the environment. They must notice the model and the behavior occurring. Attention level can vary based on the characteristic, the model, and the environment, including the model's degree of likeness and the observer's current mood. So first is attention. In simple word, how much attention one pays to the environment. That the scope of attention may vary from individual to individual. In human, it is likely to observe it is likely that the observer will pay attention to the behavior of models that are high status, talented, intelligent, or similar to observer in any way. So attention is when we observe someone. What is observation? When we observe someone, the first component of observation is attention. That is when we pay attention towards the model or towards someone. When the observer pays attention towards something or someone, that is when the model, that observer pays the attention to the behavior of the model in conditions, that is when the model is of higher status, right? Or when the model is talented, right? Or it could be because of intelligence of the model, or when there is certain similarities between the observer and the model in any way, then we pay attention, right? Then the observer pay attention towards the model. Then after paying attention, the next component of observation is retention. Simple attention is not enough. To learn a new behavior, an observer must also retain or remember the behavior of the model. To increase the chances of retention, the observer must structure the information in an easy to remember format. Suppose if you have observed someone but not able to retain what you have observed, then what is use of that thing? Only observation, only attention is not important. After attention, it is very important to retain what you have observed, right? What it is very important that observer should retain or remember what one has observed or paid attention to. To increase the chances of attention, the observer must structure the information in easy to remember format, right? Next is reproduction. The behavior is remembered, but can it be performed in real life? See, I have observed someone, right? Now I have retained my observations in my mind, right? But next is reproduction. Reproduction is I remember that thing, but can I perform it in a real life? Is it possible for me to reproduce that? Right? I retain that, but is it possible? That is reproduction is a process where the observer must be able to physically perform the behavior in the real world which he has observed and retained. Attained and retained, right? So reproduction is, as the name indicates, that is whether that observer, whether the observer will be able, or whether the observer is able to physically perform the behavior in the real world which he has retained, right? Then motivation. All learning requires some degree of personal motivation. For observational learning, the observer must be motivated to produce the desired behavior. Sometimes this motivation is intrinsic to the observer. Other times motivation can come in the form of external reinforcements, rewards and punishments. See, motivation plays an important role. Motivation is, in easier words, if I define the motivation, what is motivation? Why should I do this? What will I get from this? That is motivation, right? So there, what will I, when I can understand why should I do this, what is my profit in that, what will I get from this, then it is the reason. The reasons for one action is motivation, right? When I am able to find that reason, then only the learner put efforts to reproduce the things, reproduce the retained behavior, right? So it is required that the observer must be motivated to produce the desired behavior, right? And the motivation could be of two types, that is the intrinsic motivation and the extrinsic motivation, right? Intrinsic motivation is, the motivation could be intrinsic motivation, that is intrinsic to the observer, that is when the motivator or the observer feels from inside that I want to do that, or I should have do that, or I should behave like that. There could be the internal reasons, the personal reason, or other times it could be extrinsic motivation, right? Or that is, extrinsic motivation is when some external forces pressurize the observer to perform in a particular way, then that is extrinsic motivator. It could be the reward or the punishment or anything else. So observation is one of the important way of learning, right? But observation learning, there are the four processes of observation learning, that is attention, that the observer must pay attention towards the model, right? Then the retention, only attention is not required. The observer must be able to retain what one has observed. Then the reproduction is whether, if it is in the mind of the observer, is it possible for the observer to reproduce or to behave in that particular way? And motivation, fourth is motivation. Motivation is that there should be a reason why the observer should learn that thing or should behave in that particular way, right? So memory, structure and functioning. So we discussed about learned perception, we discussed about memory. Sorry, we discussed about the learning. Perception is what? Perception is what? The viewpoint of an individual is perception. What is learning? A permanent change in the behavior on the basis of experience is learning. What is memory? Structure and functioning of memory. Memory involves a process of acquiring information and storing it over a time so that it will be available whenever it is needed. There are three distinct memory systems: sensory memory system, short-term memory system and long-term memory system, and each plays a very important role in processing a brand-related information. Memory plays an important role. Short-term memory system, at times we purchase that product or some brand and we forget about that. Then the sensory memory system. Then the short-term memory system and the long-term memory system. What is sensory memory? The sensory memory permits the storage of information we receive from our senses. This storage is very temporary. It lasts for a couple of seconds at most, right? Suppose when we are passing by some canteen or some bakery, that smell motivates us, or we remember that smells for a couple of seconds, and after a few seconds when we go away from that bakery, we forget about that smell, right? So it is very temporary. It lasts for a couple of seconds only. It would be sufficient to allow a person to determine if he or she should investigate further right? If the information is retained for further processing, it processed through the attentional gate and it transformed into the short-term memory. Sensory memory is when we receive it from our senses. It could be it could last for a couple of seconds, and if person this memory is sufficient to allow a person to decide whether that person should investigate that further or not. Suppose I'm passing by a bakery, that smell can give me a time whether I want to have something from that bakery, or whether I should pass that bakery without having something. Right? If the observer decides for further processing, right, then it passes through the attentional gate and it transferred into the short-term memory. Suppose if I had something, then the taste of that product, whether good or bad, that will be in my mind for a short term. Then the short-term memory will be that also stores the information for a limited period of time, and its capacity is limited. Similar to computer, this system is regarded as the working memory. It holds the information we are currently processing. That verbal inputs may be stored. Understand what is perception, what is learning, what is memory. Now, what is attitude and attitude change? What is attitude? Attitude is learned predisposition to a respond in consistently favorable or unfavorable manner with respect to a given stimuli. Right? That is how one behaves or one respond, right, in favorable or unfavorable manner with respect to a given stimuli. A learned predisposition to respond in a consistently favorable or unfavorable manner, right? Or it is a relatively enduring organization of interrelated beliefs that describes, evaluate, and advocate the action with respect to an object or situations. Right? What is attitude? It is a learned predisposition to respond to a consistently favorable or unfavorable manner with respect to a given stimuli. How one behaves to a given stimuli consistently, it is a learned predisposition, right? That is attitude. The first is that attitude is not a transient feeling but represents an enduring feeling, right, or evaluation. And secondly, it derives its genesis and strength from variety of sources of information, including perceptions and experience. And thirdly, it signals about the likely course of action by the consumers. And fourth, that attitude is the product of learning and is not something inherited or inborn. Attitude is also used as replacement term of describing belief system of a person. So what is attitude? Then again the belief system, your viewpoint. The last point is very important. That is replacement term for describing the belief system. What one thinks about someone, something, or some event. That is your attitude. It is a learned disposition. That is permanent change in the behavior because of experiences, right? Belief system of a person. Attitude and consumer behavior. Attitude plays an important role in consumer decision making. Consumer receives a variety of marketing communication about what they should buy and they should not buy. Right. On the basis of input received from the various sources, consumer develop their assessment of the brands, better known as the brand image. Right. The brand image helps the consumer in believing which brand is more likely to have a particular benefits, or it should be noted that since these brands beliefs are based on the consumer perception, that may sometimes maybe variance with the reality. So attitude plays an important role. Right? How attitude plays an important role? Attitude is again a belief system. It is a perception of an individual, right? So consumer receives a variety of marketing communication, right? And they received information from the various sources, and on the basis of these various sources, the consumer develop their assessments of the brand, right? And after assessing the brands, it creates a brand image, right? Now this brand image plays an important role in consumer decision making, right? This brand image helps the consumer in believing that which brand is more better than the other brand, right? Suppose if consumer thinks that A brand's product or the cosmetic is better than the B brand's product because of his attitude, or because of the information that he or she received from the various sources, right? Or because he feels like that that A brand the cosmetics of brand A has been used by the various uh, celebrities, then it created a brand image of that product, and he or she feels like that this product of this brand, the cosmetics of brand A is better than the brand B. Then again it depends, why vice versa could be true, but again that consumer will prefer to purchase that brand A rather than the brand B because of the attitude, because of the perception of an individual, right? There are the actor actually the attitude consists of the three component. It is made up of the three components: the affective component, the cognitive component, and the cognitive component, right? Now see, the affective, cognitive, and the cognitive component of this. See, try to understand it like this. The cognitive component of attitude is what? The cognitive component of attitude is when we try to assess the things on the basis of on the basis of the information which we get from the various stimuli, right? That is the cognitive component of the attitude. That is the learning behavior which we learn from the various that is when we see, consumer gets the information from the various sources, and he try to analyze that information, and then he make an image of that, and then he make then he develop an attitude or a belief system about a product on the basis of the information. This is the cognitive component, and that image or that belief system of the consumer plays an important role, because it is the next part is the affective component, because it creates an emotion, favorable or unfavorable emotion about a product and the brand. And then cognitive is behavior component of attitude. Then according to the affective component of the attitude or the emotional component of the attitude, the consumer behaves. If consumer if the emotions of the consumer is favorable, then they will behave in a particular way. They will prefer to buy a product of that brand. If the attitude or the emotions are negative, not the attitude, the emotions of consumer is negative about something, then they behave in another way. So these are the three components of attitude. The first is the cognitive component, the emotional component, and the behavior component of attitude, and it plays an important role in consumer behavior. For cognitive component of attitude, by the cognitive component of attitude is related to your mind, the information which the consumer gets from the various sources. He try to analyze that information and interpret that information. On the basis of his analysis and interpretation, the consumer develops an emotions for that particular brand or the product. It could be favorable or unfavorable, and according to the emotion, the consumer behaves, right? If the emotions are favorable for a particular brand or the product, the consumer will prefer to buy that product. If emotions are unfavorable about the product or a brand, the consumers will try not to purchase that product, right? There are various function of consumer attitudes. Actually, first is the utilitarian function. The consumer attitude fulfills a utilitarian function as they guide consumer in achieving their desired needs. What is utilitarian? That is, we want to satisfy, the consumer wants to satisfy their needs and wants. We prefer to buy the products which can satisfy our needs and products. That this is the utilitarian function of the attitude. Second is the ego defensive function of attitude. This function protects the consumer against the internal and external anxieties and the environment. Ego defensive function is at times the consumer feels anxious, right? And it plays an important role that this ego defensive function of attitude protects the consumer against the internal and external anxieties. The value defensive, the next function is the value expressive function. Often consumer uses their attitude as the expression of their value and self concept, right? Values and self concept. At times we prefer to buy a certain product or a product of a certain brand because we feel like it suits our it defines us, this product defines us, or this product is as per our value or the status. So there are the three functions of consumer attitude, right? Now personality and self concept. We discussed about we started with perception. What is perception? The viewpoint of an individual or consumer is perception, and perception plays an important role in consumer behavior and the decision. Then we discussed about learning. What is learning? Learning is a permanent behavior change in behavior because of experience. Then again, it plays an important role in consumer behavior or consumer attitude. Then we discussed about the memory. We discussed about the three types of the memory. Why is it important? Because it is very, memory plays an important role. Why? Because when the consumer retain something about the retain it is important that the product should be retained in the memory of the consumer. Then only consumer will feel like whether they need it or not. Then we discussed about the attitude. What is attitude? Attitude is again the belief system, right? And we discussed about the components of the attitude, the types of the memory, and the behavior system. And all these plays an important role in consumer attitude, consumer behavior, and the decision making. The viewpoint of the consumer, the learning process of the consumer, right, or the attitude or the belief system of the consumer plays an important role in consumer decision making, right? I hope this is clear to all, right? In our next lecture, we'll start with personality and self concept. That's all for today. Thank you very much. Namaskar.